Everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Melissa Wooten. I'm a program officer here at the foundation. One of the awards that I manage is the Scholars Program, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit about that award today. And so, just a few things to know. You can enter any questions that you have within the control panel for the webinar. We will definitely have time towards the end to answer questions. Some people have already sent questions in, but if something comes up during the presentation, feel free to drop something in the chat. And also to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will definitely post this recording to the website within a few days. And so one of the key things that I'll talk about throughout this presentation is the way in which the Scholars Program is a career development award. And so in addition to funding a particular research project, it really is an invitation to expand your expertise. And so this is something that I'll be talking about throughout the presentation. What I'm going to do is just provide an overview of the program basics, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the research priorities that we have here at the foundation, what that means for a scholars application, as well as some program goals that are specific to the scholars program. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how to craft a proposal, so how to put together a successful proposal, and then there will be space for questions. And so the first thing to know is just a little bit about the overall structure of the Scholar Award. It is a career development grant. We provide $350,000 of funding for 5 years. If you're thinking about applying and you've already started to put together a budget, just one thing to know, it's up to you how you distribute that money over the 5 years, but $350,000 is the maximum amount. The goal of the Scholars Program is for early career scholars to be able to expand their expertise. And so what this means is that it is funding both a research project, but also it is funding people's ability to grow and learn so that they can successfully carry out that research project. And so it's an investment in a project and in a person's growth and learning. And so with that, we are funding both a research and a mentoring plan. A research plan is probably quite familiar to everyone. And so again, you have to lay out the project that you're studying, what your goals are, and what you hope to accomplish within that individual project. But you also have to propose a mentoring plan that will actually help you carry out that project or bring that project to fruition. The mentoring plan can encompass particular mentors, so like actual individuals that will help you bring this project to fruition, but it can also encompass courses and other materials that you might engage with that will also help you bring the project to fruition. In terms of who's eligible for the Scholars Award, a few things to keep in mind. You have to be within 7 years of having earned your doctorate, or if you have a medical degree, you have to be within 7 years of having earned your first residency. You also have to be within what we talk about as a career ladder position. If you're on the tenure track, that's a career ladder position where there's a clear progression. The institution makes a financial commitment to you, and your progression is based in large part on your research productivity. If you aren't in a tenure track position, there are still other positions that meet that criteria of being career ladder. And again, the important things to note would be that there has to be a clear progression. And so oftentimes, or I should say more recently, we're seeing people who are in like research scientist positions within academic institutions. There's a clear progression. So they might start off as like an assistant research scientist, and their promotion to say associate research scientist is dependent upon their research productivity. And so there are other positions that aren't just tenure track that are also career ladder, and what you would want to do perhaps within a nomination letter that your institution can submit is to help us understand exactly what's the progression and how the promotion criteria depend on your research productivity. Another thing to know in terms of eligibility, is that only one person can be nominated per college or division. So only one person from, say, like the College of Social Sciences or Arts and Sciences, or the College of Education or School of Education, if you have one, can be nominated or can be put forward. But across an entire university, multiple people can be nominated. But within one college, only one person can come forward. So you might have to, let people know early that you're interested in applying for the scholars program, because there may be some sort of internal competition that you have to put yourself up and be willing to go through in order to emerge as a person that the college is going to nominate or let apply for this award. In addition to the $350,000, we also support scholars in other ways. We organize an annual scholars retreat where scholars come, they give presentations, they talk about the challenges that they're having with their research project, places where they might be stuck. And there's a community of people, including fellow scholars and senior scholars, who will provide advice and assistance on how to keep the research project moving forward. We also host other workshops as a foundation that scholars are invited to. And again, these are also sites where scholars can come and receive professional support for keeping their projects moving. And so in addition to the financial commitment that we make to allowing people to expand their expertise, we also provide lots of assistance and professional development opportunities to make sure that people are expanding their expertise in the ways that they laid out. To let you know a little bit about how applications are treated once they're submitted, I'll talk about the review process. And so every year applications are due in the early part of July. They're typically due around the 4th of July. This year, the application is due on July 3rd. Once an application is submitted, they are reviewed by senior staff members. And what senior staff are looking for at that point is really just an eligibility check. And so again, I mentioned that you have to be within 7 years of having earned your doctorate or having completed your first medical residency. You have to be within a career ladder position. And so we're going through the applications to make sure that like those sorts of eligibility markers have been checked. We're also going through the application to make sure that there's a fit with the foundation's priorities or foundation focus areas, which I'll talk about in a few moments. But what we're doing at that point is really just thinking about, are these applications eligible for this particular program? At the point of staff review, about a third of the applications are declined at that point. And so for the 2/3 that move forward at that point, they go on to the selection committee. And so the scholar selection committee consists of 15 senior scholars. They represent multiple disciplines. And each application that moves forward at this point is reviewed by 2 selection committee members. Applications at this point receive a very in-depth review. Selection committee members are responding to a series of prompts, about 14 prompts in total, where they assess the applicant's content, the application's content. And at the end of that selection committee review, 10 applications are selected and they become what we term within the foundation as finalists for the Scholars Award. For all the applications that don't move forward at that point, people have access to those in-depth committee reviews. And so that's one way that people are getting feedback, and hopefully feedback that can help move their project forward, even though they're not going to be getting the grant at this particular moment. For those 10 finalists, their applications are then sent out for external review. And within that external review process, 2 senior scholars review those applications. And after that external review happens, applicants get access to those reviews. And so at this point, applicants have access to 2 selection committee reviews and 2 external reviews, and they then come to the foundation to actually give an in-person interview where they have the opportunity to respond to those reviews, talk to address the critiques that may have been raised as a part of those reviews. And that interview happens with the full selection committee. After that interview process, between 4 and 6 applicants are recommended to the board for approval. And so in general, on average, we get about 50 applications per year for the Scholars Award. And again, 1/3 of those are declined at senior staff review. The rest go on to selection committee. And then at the end of the day, between 4 and 6 are recommended to the board for approval. And so we're talking about a 10% rate in terms of chances to actually get the grant. And so if you're thinking about applying, there are a couple things that is really important for you to focus on. The first thing that you want to consider is whether or not your research fits with the foundation's focus areas. There are 2 focus areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about both. The first that I'll talk about is the reducing inequality in youth outcomes area. This has been a foundation focus area since 2014. And then the other focus area that we have is improving the use of research evidence in ways that benefit youth. This portfolio was first started in 2008, but then it was refocused in 2015. To give you more context for what it means for your research to fit within the foundation focus area, I'll start by talking about the reducing inequality area. And so within this portfolio, what we're looking for is research that would seek to reduce inequality based on what we talk about as being different dimensions of inequality. This could be economic standing, it could be race or ethnicity, or it could be immigrant origin status. Those are the 5 that we call out on the website. But if your project is looking to say reduce inequality based on gender or sexual orientation, you can make that case to us. And so I just wanted to say that you don't only have to stick to the items or dimensions of inequality that are on our website, but if you think that there's a compelling reason to focus on, say, LGBTQ status, then that's something that you can narrate within your application. We're also seeking within this priority research that will help us build, test, or improve policies, programs, and practices that will reduce inequality in a particular set of outcomes. Those could be academic, they could be behavioral, they could be economic, or they could be social outcomes. And so within this funding priority, a couple of things that we're really interested in is thinking about soliciting research that identifies specific levers that can be pushed that will reduce inequality. And we're not simply interested in funding research that will identify that an inequality exists or theorize about why inequality exists. We're not trying to fund additional research that will help us understand that inequality exists. We're taking the existence of inequality as a given and looking to fund research that will actually help us reduce those inequalities. And so successful applicants within the reducing inequality portfolio have to articulate a clear theory of change. And so if we do X, we will reduce inequality in academic outcomes between Black and white students. If we do X, we'll reduce inequality in economic outcomes between children living in poverty and their wealthier counterparts. And so it's really important to have that theory of change about how if you design an intervention or if a particular policy initiative were passed, then inequality would actually be reduced. And so that's something that's really important to keep in mind if you're thinking about applying to the Scholars Program within the Reducing Inequality focus area. Now, if you're thinking about applying to the Scholars Program within the Improving the Use of Research Evidence portfolio, there are some other things to consider. And so one of the core things that this particular foundation focus area is concerned with is the idea that as researchers produce evidence that has the potential to reduce inequality in ways that benefit youth, how do we get decision makers in youth serving settings to actually adopt that research evidence and implement it? And so again, we have researchers who are producing evidence, but researchers tend not to be within those youth serving settings. And so what do we need to do? What conditions do we need to foster? What organizational structures might we need to manipulate in order for decision makers within those youth serving settings to adopt that evidence and implement it within those settings? And so research in this area might propose to study different conditions between researchers and decision makers that facilitate the use of research evidence. Or again, they might focus on different structural configurations that enable decision makers to incorporate evidence. Those are just a couple of examples. But what is also really important for scholars within this area of who are hoping to submit an application through this priority area to focus on is what exactly they mean by research use. And so it's really important to be engaging with the existing literature, which is long-standing in this area. And so you have to define what it is that you mean by research use. And so perhaps you're focusing on like the conceptual use of research evidence. And so that's really thinking about like, well, are there definitions that are important? And that's the type of research use that you're focused on, like how people define an issue. Or are you thinking about the instrumental use of research evidence? And so people are adopting or engaging with research evidence in hopes that they can use it in a way that will like get someone to go down a particular avenue or encourage a particular course of action. Those are just a couple of different types of research use. And again, there is a body of literature. You can look on the Foundation's website that will offer you plenty of examples and point you in the direction so that you can better navigate this literature. But the overarching point is that you actually have to be engaging with this literature. And so thinking about what are the conditions that will foster research use and being very specific about how it is that you're defining research use and what type of research use you're interested in within your particular project. And so just to provide you with a couple of examples of recently funded scholars and what their projects were and how they fit within those two different focus areas. I'll start with Muniz Castro, recently funded scholar within the use of research evidence area. One of the things or one of the core points within this project was trying to think about the role of holistic legal review. And so taking into account, when people are talking about holistic legal review, they're talking about how you can take into account the research evidence about the factors that contribute to legal system involvement and the consequences of being involved within the legal system for you. And so there's a body of evidence that exists that documents these things. And so then the question becomes, well, how do you get lawyers to engage with this body of evidence? Because there's also research that shows that lawyers who engage in this holistic review process, they're actually able to get better outcomes for their youth clients. And so how can we get more people, more lawyers to engage with this body of evidence? And so Muniz Castro is asking this question about what would actually facilitate more lawyers adopting this approach to advocacy. And so what would facilitate more lawyers engaging with this body of evidence? And so the thing that Muniz Castro is going to focus on is thinking about the role of professional networks. And so thinking about the ways in which professional networks expose people to information, and does being exposed to information about holistic review encourage and improve the use of that information. Muniz Castro's project is a 5-year ethnography of a particular law firm, and Muniz Castro will be using, in addition to ethnography, network analytic techniques as well. A second study to highlight that's focused on the reducing inequality area is by Quadlin. One of the things that Quadlin is interested in is this, again, there's evidence that exists that shows that low income students who are finishing up college, they don't apply for the same types of jobs that their higher income counterparts do. Low income students tend to apply for jobs that offer less pay, and they could be considered less competitive in other ways in addition to the pay that they offer. And so what research shows is that there's this existing inequality in job seeking outcomes between low income college students and their higher income counterparts. And so one of the things that Quadlin is interested in is thinking about, well, how can colleges better support this school to work transition for low income students to actually reduce this inequality? And so Quadlin has proposed to get at this phenomena by engaging a longitudinal interview process where Quadlin will follow students for the duration of their college experience in order to understand their job seeking behaviors. And then Quadlin will design an experiment that hopes to disrupt this process. It'll be a career coaching intervention that would actually encourage students to apply for higher paying jobs. And so a second thing to think about if you're considering applying for a scholars grant is, are you interested in pursuing career development in addition to completing a research project? And so again, the scholars grant is funding both the research itself and also making an investment in people's ability to grow. So providing a supportive context so that you can grow and learn and effectively carry out the research project that you proposed. And so again, to give you a couple of examples of what the two projects that were highlighted a moment ago, what type of growth they were hoping to undergo as a result of receiving this award as well. Munis Castro had existing expertise in doctrinal legal analysis and had focused a lot on the impact of laws and policies on the lives of low-income youth. And with this particular project, Munis Castro is looking to grow in the areas of strategies and conditions that facilitate and hinder lawyers' use of research evidence. And so there's that theoretical area in which Munis Castro is hoping to grow. And then there are also another theoretical area that Munis Castro is hoping to grow is around knowledge brokering. And so what is that empirical body of research about, and how does knowledge brokering show up in this particular context? And then also wanting to grow in methodological ways in social network theory. And so these were three things that Munis Castro hadn't engaged a lot with before in their prior research. And so wanting to be able to grow and stretch and needing to acquire a facility with both these theoretical traditions and these methodological traditions in order to carry out that project. For Quadlin, Quadlin's existing expertise was as a statistician and an experimentalist. And so in order to understand how to reduce socioeconomic inequality in pathways from college to work, Quadlin wanted to be able to do more qualitative work. And so thinking about those longitudinal interviews and the ways in which qualitative analyses can help you get at that more textured narrative level data and provide an in-depth understanding about how job seeking behavior unfolds over a long period of time. And Quadlin was also interested in thinking about this from a psychological approach. And so Quadlin is a sociologist, and so being able to think about what motivates youth behavior, what motivates job seeking behavior from a psychological approach was an area of growth as well. And so if you're thinking about applying for the Scholars Program, I encourage you to both consider how your research fits within the foundation's priorities, but then also what growth do you hope to undergo? What areas are you hoping to develop in methodologically or theoretically? Now I'll talk a little bit about crafting a proposal or putting a successful proposal together. There are a couple things to think about as you put together a proposal. At each point of the review process, there are essentially four things that are being evaluated. The applicant themselves is being evaluated, the research plan, the mentoring plan, and institutional support are also being evaluated. I'll talk a little bit about each of those in detail. For the applicant, a couple things to keep in mind. The publication record is being evaluated. It's not just about the quantity of publications, the quality of those publications are also being evaluated. Applicants have to submit two published pieces of research along with the application. And so reviewers are reading those publications, assessing them for their quality, for their ingenuity. And so again, thinking about how you illustrate that you have a promising publication record. And it's not just about the sheer number, but also helping people understand how your work fits within particular traditions, and what was surprising about your work, what's been influential about your work. And so again, this idea around applicants are being judged for their ability to become an influential scholar. And so again, thinking about the connection between the quality of your work and the likelihood that it's influencing people within your discipline. And applicants are also being evaluated in terms of how clear they are in their learning goals. And so again, if you're laying out a project and you're identifying some ways in which you need to grow and develop to successfully complete that project, you have to be clear on that. And so thinking about how the ways in which you talk about it throughout the application need to both make sense, and there needs to be a through line within the application as you narrate the ways in which you want to grow and learn, and how the things that you're proposing to do will actually get you there. In thinking about the research plan, there are a couple different things to consider or to have in your mind in terms of how the application is being evaluated. And so I already spoke about that applications are being evaluated based on the fit with the foundation's research interests. Other elements that are being evaluated are the strength of the overall research design. And so again, thinking about the connection between the theory, between the methods, between the analysis, and that all has to be a cohesive story that's being built. Additionally, the research plan needs to fit the learning goals. And so again, if you're, say, interested in moving from a more sociological understanding of youth behavior to a psychological understanding of youth behavior, then again, that needs to be narrated within the application, and it needs to be clear, like why moving from a sociological perspective to, say, a psychological perspective makes sense for the design, makes sense methodologically, but also makes sense for the learning goals that you're proposing. And then one thing to consider if your project consists of multiple studies is that they need to be cohesive. And so it needs to be clear why the multiple studies are needed and how they fit together and play off of one another. And so I use the example of Quadlin, who was first going to do a series of longitudinal interviews, and then those interviews were going to inform an eventual intervention. And so again, being able to make the argument about why the studies are necessary in combination with one another is something that's very important to do if you're proposing multiple studies. I do want to say that you don't have to have multiple studies. And so again, part of the reason why I chose to highlight those two recently funded applications is that one is a 5-year ethnography. And so we can think about that as being one study, whereas the other is proposing to do two different things, but they do relate to one another. And so again, that's just something to think about. For the mentoring plan, a few things or a few areas that applications are being assessed on is whether or not it's clear that the mentors are committed. Applicants to the Scholars Program have to have 1 to 2 mentors, and so you have to have at least one, but most people will have 2 mentors for their project. And the commitment that those mentors have to your growth has to be apparent. It needs to be apparent that there have been conversations, and so people should be able to read an application, and what the applicant says about the growth that they hope to undergo matches what the mentor says, and it's clear how the mentor is going to support the applicant in that process. And so that commitment needs to be clear. It also needs to be clear, or I should say applications are being evaluated on whether or not it appears that the mentor relationship would add value. And so one way to think about that is if you're proposing a mentor as someone who works in your department, that's someone who it would appear on face value that you have easy access to. And so it would be less clear than how getting this award would be value add. If that's the mentoring relationship you're seeking, it seems like that would be fairly easy to navigate without the investment that this award comes with. And so as you put together a mentoring plan and think about who would make ideal mentors for your particular project, you'll want to think about what value those relationships add, and how without the award, you wouldn't be able to forge those relationships. So that's something to also keep in mind. Again, I touched on this a little bit, that the mentors and your learning goals match. And so again, if you're hoping to gain facility with social network analyses, have you chosen mentors that will actually help you do that? If you're hoping to gain facility, say with machine learning, have you chosen mentors that will actually help you do that? And so there needs to be that coherence as well. And another thing that we often see with successful proposals is that you can already tell that some mentoring has begun. And so you can kind of see the intellectual influence of a mentor within an application. And so that's also something to keep in mind, that if you're engaging with mentors as you put the application together, that will be evident. Like, we'll already start to see how applicants are incorporating their mentors' thinking, in particular theoretical areas or methodological traditions. And so that's also something to keep in mind, and something that evaluators are oftentimes looking for. As you put together your mentoring plan, we encourage you to refer to the different resources that we've made available on the website. There are a couple that I'll just call out here. We have one guide that is called Moving It Forward. That guide focuses on different institutional barriers that, in particular, junior researchers of color can face when they're seeking out mentoring. And so there are different resources that we point to that can help junior researchers of color account for these sorts of things and think about how they'll work with their mentors to overcome those different barriers. Pay It Forward has additional guidance for that's particular to mentors and thinking about what it means to be an effective mentor to junior scholars. And then we have a third guide, Maximizing Mentoring. It talks about more of, say, like the procedures for setting up a successful mentoring relationship. And so it has ideas about like what a mentoring contract can look like, what an appropriate schedule of meetings can look like. And so again, more like step-by-step on the ground guidance about how to set up your mentoring relationships. And so I do encourage you to review those materials as you're putting together a mentoring plan. And then the fourth area that applications are evaluated on is whether or not the institutional support is clear. And so again, do you have the infrastructure needed to carry out your research? And so what commitments is your university making to you? You know, if you need to set up a lab in order to do this, has your university made clear that they will that they will support you in this work? If there are other infrastructures that are needed, again, that being clear within the application. These might be things that would potentially get talked about in a nomination letter that would come from, say, a department chair or a dean. But again, thinking about the infrastructure needed, those could be physical resources as well as less tangible resources that are needed to carry out the research and mentoring plan. Another thing that has to be clear is that the institution is committing to provide you with at least half of your time to conduct research during the course of the 5-year award. That time does not all have to be dedicated to the project that's laid out within the Scholars Award, but the university does have to commit to allowing you to spend at least half of your time to conducting research during the course of the award. And so those two commitments need to be clear within an application. A couple of final tips that I'll offer are, it's really important to, as you're putting together an application, to balance your ambition with what's feasible. And so 5 years for a research project is at once a lot of time, but also when you start to think about other commitments that you have as a faculty member, when you start to think about, you know, if you're recruiting people to a research study, the barriers that you might confront in that process, if you're thinking about like secondary analysis of data, what it might take to, you know, get all the data that you need in one place, link different data sets, different permissions that you might need in order to actually access the data. So thinking about whether or not what you're proposing to do within a 5-year process is feasible is something that you also have to keep in mind. And so you have to think about, how do you propose a project that is ambitious enough, but also is feasible? And so that's a balance that's important to strike. Again, another application tip is really to think about getting a good mentor or two. And so again, for the Scholars Award, most applications have recruited 2 mentors to support them on their journey to expanding their expertise. And so again, thinking about what makes a good mentor for your particular project. Something to consider is that the best mentor may not always be like the most well-known scholar in a particular area. You want to be thinking about engaging mentors who have a track record of successfully supporting junior scholars. And so thinking about who those people are within the areas that you want to grow might require some conversations with people where you get more textured information about a person's mentoring style and how they interact with junior scholars. And so again, thinking about what it means to have a good mentor. Is that just the person who's most well known in an area, or are there other qualities that you might need to consider? I also encourage you to see examples of successful proposals that we've made available online. And so we have annotated successful examples of successful scholar applications. We've annotated the research proposal section for a few, and also a mentoring plan for at least one application. And so going through those examples can help you understand like what external reviewers and selection committee members were intrigued by within proposals, appreciated about proposals. And so we actually have like called those areas out to give you some insight into like what was it about how a particular paragraph or section was constructed that reviewers really appreciated. And so we hope by providing that sort of guidance that it will just give you some background and insight into how to put together a successful application. And